Ladies and gentlemen, this is the headline of international news. The behaviors being exhibited by American President Donald Trump towards Europe leave no one silent. Since his rise to power, obviously starting from January 2025, he has adopted a strategy towards Europe that is not openly acknowledged. So, there is crying and panic in Europe. Meanwhile, Emmanuel Macron is trying to curry favor, and it is in this context that the former French President François Hollande decides to break the silence to clearly tell the truth. To the Europeans, clearly tell the truth. To the French, and to put Emmanuel Macron back in his place. And then, to make it clear to anyone who will listen that the situation is very serious. The historical relations as allies of Europe, alliances between Europe and the United States of America are now broken. But unfortunately, the Europeans are turning a blind eye. They pretend not to see. It obviously took someone like François Hollande to come out and tell Europe the hard truths so that Europe could understand. So it was in an interview he gave to the newspaper Le Monde that he was very, very clear. Yes, and if after this intervention, he, as a former president, if he finishes speaking and the Europeans, the French, refuse to understand and Macron refuses to understand, he would have already done his best. Yes, because the situation that has been there since January 20th, 2025, that Donald Trump officially just took office, everything changed. He turned everything upside down. And he refuses to understand things. Ladies and gentlemen, in the context of this video conference, that's what we are going to talk about, the raw truths of François Hollande. But before continuing, as usual, you know very well, I ask you to share the video conference as much as possible. Share it in all possible groups. In particular, Itaksan, do not forget, we have the new Samouraï channel that is dedicated to information exclusively in English. This is for our friends who often strive, who are there, who try to translate our video conferences and almost can't, who understand English better than French. Since Africa, we are not only French speakers, there are English speakers. So we have created the channel. So I leave the link in the description. Go ahead. There you go. Go ahead. Subscribe. Well, if I forget, I won't put it in the description. Look, we have already shared the link on the page. There you go. Give it lots of likes, share the video conference, share it as much as possible. Let's dive into the depths. So, Donald Trump's return to the White House comes with significant decisions that fuel many debates in the West. Among the critical voices, that of the former French President François Hollande stands out. Yes, his analysis stands out. He denounces the concerning rapprochement of the United States of America with historical adversaries and an aggressive economic policy towards Europe. One can agree with him. Historically, there is a framework. There is a path that has been laid out. And on this path, one should never agree with Russia. One must be in alliance with Europe. There must be customs exemptions concerning Europe and vice versa. This is what Donald Trump is disrupting. First, imagine that he announced he was going to increase tariffs on everything coming from Europe to 25%. So, it's a decision aimed at weakening, but properly Europe. The Europeans will find themselves weakened to the core, as if that wasn't enough. Instead of waging a fierce battle, a struggle with coercive force against Russia, he wants to go through all means to agree, to understand each other with Vladimir Putin's Russia. So, the former president, he says this, François Hollande, he says if agreements have always existed between the United States and Europe, This time, the current situation marks an unprecedented break. It's the break. There is no longer an alliance, but the Europeans are sleeping. They are not understanding. So François Hollande wants to wake them up. He wants them to be awakened. Since Donald Trump in recent times, the choices and decisions he is making are not at all in favor of Europe. What does he say? He says this: the open support from Washington to certain extremist movements on the European continent. Washington supports certain extremist movements on the European continent. Yet, he should rally with Europe to fight against these extremist movements. First of all, and secondly, Washington's growing alignment with Russia raises questions. Raises, as we call them, questions about the reliability of the transatlantic partnership. So here is obviously what François Hollande says. He says that it is a policy used by, what's his name, Donald Trump, to weaken Europe. He wants to weaken Europe. But what is the argument that Donald Trump puts forward? Donald Trump says it's to better face China, which is in unprecedented competition on the commercial front, especially with America. So he says that Donald Trump's stance on international relations reflects a pragmatism devoid of any traditional diplomatic consideration. Diplomatic consideration. Traditional, meaning that which has always existed with them. In Donald Trump's current stance, he does not resort to that. That is to say, he comes and sweeps everything away. So, he says that to better understand this, one just needs to look at Donald Trump's approach towards Russia. So, the former French President François Hollande emphasized the necessity of a clear balance of power against Vladimir Putin. This is what must be done. A clear balance of power against Putin. Either he does it or we make him do it. And François Hollande specifies, he says this is what Donald Trump does not want. He wants an agreement at all costs with Vladimir Putin. And this is what Donald Trump wants. Even countries that are supposed to be enemies of Europe, such as Iran and others. Donald Trump has promised to sign agreements with these different countries. So, François Hollande says he observes that the Trump administration seems to favor an agreement at all costs, even if it means weakening European positions. This change, of course, could, according to him, have major repercussions on stability in Ukraine and beyond. So here is overall what he says. But will the Europeans understand? Will the Europeans understand it? That is to say, Donald Trump has shown the Europeans that from now on, it is you who are in the crosshairs. You are the enemies. My allies are now Russia, China, and others. But you are no longer allies. And that is what Europe refuses to understand. Ladies and gentlemen, François Hollande has spoken a lot. So we will see, will Europe understand? But even if Europe understood, the Europeans depend on the United States of America. That is why they are pondering, thinking to see what they can really do to break free from this dependence on the United States of America. So young ladies and gentlemen, this is the headline news. Thank you for sharing it as much as possible. I will be back shortly with more news. That was the voice of your one and only samurai.